Proposal 3.
Yes.
Okay. I haven't watched any of your videos, I'll be honest.
Okay. All right. This is one that I've touched on. I'm going to go on
a limb.
Yes.
I think I know what your position is on it. And I will listen to it and then ask you some questions.
Okay. Yeah, because I sat down right after the decision, the Supreme Court decision. I sat down with a resident from the west side of the district. Him and I had a 45-minute conversation on it. I was interviewed in this room for somebody else's podcast, and we discussed it a lot. And then my libertarian opponent and we had a conversation on it. So it's one that I've been very forthcoming with my position that I believe abortion is a decision between the woman and her doctor. And I think when people are discussing the issue, they fail to recognize the safeguard that is in place in that position, which is the doctor, where I don't think a politician needs to be inserting their own opinion into the decision. I think the doctors in the medical community can be the ones to properly regulate and identify when such a procedure should be allowed and not, because they have a Hippocratic oath standard to do no harm. And so those very radical hypotheticals of a 9-month-old pregnant woman, perfectly healthy pregnancy and all that stuff, there is no doctor, in my view, who is going to perform an abortion in that situation. That's the safeguard, is that the doctor would be violating their Hippocratic standard. And yeah, the AMA, the American Medical Association, should be able to, take away the license of any doctor that violates those standards that they as a medical community decide. Because to put it in the hands of politicians and putting it up for public debate as to, okay, should it be allowed or not, politicians are never going to know the nuance involved when that decision is being made. And the nuance is where you can quickly fall into the arena of, it is horrible for us as a society and the state government to be forcing this woman to proceed with her pregnancy, whether it's birth defects like a trisomy 13 birth defect, a fetus that has no potential to ever make it out of the hospital alive. And the idea that, the woman hears that news and is devastated, but then the government's going to hit her with a double whammy of, you've still got to proceed up until the point that you are on the verge of death. Like, it's to me, in order to prevent those truly horrific scenarios, you have to remove the government from the equation. And then to prevent the other side's truly horrific scenarios, trust the medical community to properly make sure there's no doctors out there doing those horrific hypotheticals. That's my position in general.
Okay. A lot there. You said the word doctor a lot.
Yes.
You've read the proposal.
Yes.
It doesn't limit to doctors, though. It says medical professionals.
Mm-hmm.
Would you then be opposed to Proposal 3 because it wouldn't be limited to doctors?
With any ballot proposal, you're going to have, it's going to be subjected to interpretation by the courts, right?
There isn't much interpretation of that. I mean, the way it's written, it's constitutional, right? And then the words themselves are important.
Okay.
It doesn't limit it to doctors.
Okay.
No court's going to read into the statute something that isn't there when the plain language is medical professional.
Okay.
So when it does go to a court, it's not going to be limited to doctors.
Okay. What is the plain language of arms, firearms?
Well, I think I know where your conversation is going with this, and that's regulated at a federal and state level, and they use the Interstate Commerce Clause to add in that.
No.
If that's where you're going with
No,
it.
I'm going with, are all arms treated equally by the Second Amendment, or are some still able, is the court able to decide what the Second Amendment covers and what it doesn't? For instance, fully automatic versus semi-automatic.
So we're talking about when the Second Amendment was drafted, when there wasn't fully automatic or semi-automatic weapons.
Yeah.
And that's still being litigated. And that type of litigation doesn't have a succinct timeline where it could be over within 24 hours. You're not going to get the injunctive relief. But you do think it should just be limited to doctors. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yes.
And if it's not, are you going to introduce legislation to limit it to 2 doctors to fix that, and then hopefully try to convince a judge?
And I'd be out there, the first one out there to be getting another ballot measure on to clean up any, because whenever you have a law passed or a ballot measure or whatever, there is always the possibility of unintended consequences. Yeah. And so if something is passed, if Proposal 3 is passed, and there are unintended consequences that, I disagree with, because, I'm voting to put it in the hands of qualified medical doctors, OBGYNs, and those who have historically been the ones involved in that decision process of, advising what a woman's situation is regarding her pregnancy. If all of a sudden, because of Proposal 3, it then groups in, massage therapists or whatever I've heard, it's like, then let's have another ballot measure. There's no...
I think you're right about having to have another ballot measure.
Okay.
Because that situation, it's hard to whittle down something that's part of the Constitution.
Oh, yeah, but it's no more difficult than passing Proposal 3. If Proposal 3 passes, it was fairly easy to do so. It was, they collected the signatures and then people voted for it. The same can occur 2 years from now. And that's if it's necessary. Are you and I in agreement that the 1931 law is a problem that needs fixing?
What part of the 1931 law?
That there's not nearly enough nuance or exceptions built into it to prevent pretty just horrific scenarios occurring.
Did those occur?
When?
The horrific scenarios, did those actually occur?
Prior to like Roe v. Wade?
Yeah.
I would imagine so. I don't actually know, but I would imagine so.
Okay. All right. I think that is something that's important to talk about, but there are a couple of things you brought up that I want to address as well.
Yes.
So you talked about situations where the child would not be viable.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you opposed to situations where there is nothing wrong with the child, and at that point in time, there is an abortion?
Am I personally morally opposed to it, or
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then what about an emergency room doctor? Okay. So you have a doctor. They have taken the Hippocratic Oath. And as they interpret it, do no harm also applies to the unborn child. They lose the right to have their conscientious objection to that. Do you think that they should be forced to perform abortions?
I don't think doctors should be forced to perform abortions.
And I think so far we're actually agreeing on a lot more than what most people probably thought we actually would agree on.
Because, when you ask me if I morally oppose, there's a lot of things that I may personally morally be opposed to, but I do not want the government to be taking my position and then forcing decisions onto somebody. So I'm an organ donor. You look at my license, got the little heart. I'm morally opposed.
Better person than me.
Okay.
I actually think I am too.
I'm morally opposed to people not being organ donors. I think everybody should be. It's the easiest thing in the world, and I'm going to morally think a little less of somebody for not being an organ donor. Do I think the government should force people? No, I don't want the government to force people to be organ donors. And so
Are you sure you're a Democrat?
Yes.
Okay.
So I can draw that distinction of, Yeah, I mean, I may disagree with somebody's decision about, their body or their medical decisions or whatever, but I don't want it to then put it into the government's hands to make that decision and force it upon them.
Okay. This is kind of how I view it, which I'm not sure if anybody else views it this way as I do. You agree in the fundamental idea of equality, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's self-evident.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if somebody is black, white, however they identify, whatever pronoun they use.
Mm-hmm.
That person should be treated equally.
Yeah.
Correct. And we're not saying things like equality of outcome. We're talking about equality of
treatment.
opportunity. Yeah. To me, that comes from the idea of what I call human dignity. Okay. I think it's our number one quality that we have. It's not something that you ever earn. You can't lose it. And it's not merited. Every human is created with this concept that we have human dignity. And that's why we're all created and treated equally. Fair enough so far?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where my personal views come in. With this idea of equality and human dignity, and that being our greatest asset, and no one has a higher quantity than somebody else, how could you improve someone's life at the cost of someone else's life? How does that rationalize if everyone is supposed to be equal?
Okay. Let's say it's a child that's been born and it had that birth defect.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's been born, and in order for it to make it another couple days or week, you got to have heart surgery after heart surgery. And each medical intervention, there's a chance of it, not surviving. Or you can do the alternative of, no, let's just let nature take its course there. Should the government step in and say, hey, how is your life better off if you let this child pass naturally? You've got to make every attempt, every surgery, even though best case scenario, it's still never going to make it out of the hospital, but he may live 3 months. Like, there's a point at which it's such a personal decision that I would rather trust the individuals involved to know what's best for them in their situation. And there may be times where I would personally disagree with it, but I'm not them. I'm not the one in that situation. And I don't think that as a society we are better off by forcing those who are in that scenario to do what we want rather than what they feel is best. It's about recognizing the individual's ability to know what's best for them. And the idea that how can they ever be better off by somebody else dying? I mean, there are situations where, I can empathize with the idea of you have multiple kids. You have one that's on life support. What toll does that take on your whole family to keep that one alive? And is it better just to remove life support at some point when a happy, healthy child is never really feasible here? And so...
Isn't that a pretty rare situation as compared to how it's...
Yes. But it's when you accept that concept, because, the fundamental premise of, no, the state should step in and make those decisions, then, the state has to be making the decision in that situation as well. How does the state distinguish there? And that's after birth. Before birth, you get into a whole different situation of, why is it even, do you distinguish it from, a fertilized egg in a petri dish, like with IVF fertilization? At what point, prior to birth, do you draw that distinction? Because when the 14th Amendment talks about all persons born in the United States are naturalized citizens, that's where the Constitution makes the distinction is born. Like that's the moment in which the Constitution applies and equal treatment under the law.
So a few things in response to that. From what I'm understanding, what you're saying would be, we kind of went a few different places there.
Yeah, sorry.
I think we had some pretty rare examples about that. Would you be a proponent of introducing legislation or a ballot measure that limits abortion to just I'm not saying I would agree with it,
Right.
but to those situations? Or do you think it should be more open? I mean, is it worth even having a conversation about these extremely rare circumstances when in practicality that makes up like what 0.1% of abortions?
With regard to the percentages of abortions, it is the bulk of late-term abortions. Now, most abortions occur in the first trimester, like 90%. So of the remaining 10%, second or third trimester, like the third trimester abortions are these rare situations, but
it's not limited to that, though. I mean, under the proposal, it wouldn't be limited to that.
And that's where I don't have a problem trusting the medical community to be the ones, in the Roe v. Wade era, states were allowed to make their own regulations, post-viability. And I'm not opposed to that standard either, but I'm not opposed to the Proposal 3 standard of trusting the medical community to set the guidelines and be that governing body in a way, because they're the ones with the most knowledge of what can occur during pregnancy. And yet, I think that there's no actual way to craft legislation that truly accounts for all the nuance that can occur during a pregnancy and the complications that arise, especially when you get into, the life of the mother or the health of the mother. That's a very subjective standard sometimes. And how do you write that into law in a way that doesn't put doctors in a situation where they know, okay, there's a 50-50 chance this lady's going to die. If we do an abortion, the state may come after us. And while they do, we can't practice medicine at all. Like we, go into a freeze on our entire business practice. And now we've got to fight this whole, case. We may win in the end, but then the next time we're in the same situation. Like,
has that ever happened?
I don't actually know.
And I mean, there's a lot of laws.
Yeah.
That are out there that I think address a lot of the things you're talking about, all of which should be wiped out. Proposal 3. Situations where you're talking about the life of them. That's another extraordinarily rare example where you try to treat both, and then let's say the mother has cancer. In that situation, the primary goal of treating the mother with radiation is what you seek. And the secondary result of the loss of the child at that point in time is not the intended goal. I think that is the moral distinction that's there. You mentioned something about when does life essentially begin. I think the science on it's at least pretty clear as to when you have an individual with unique DNA. And I think that we generally agree that at obviously at different points in time that all life is at least important. And from my perspective, I think all life is sacred. I think obviously we all have this human dignity, which we share in common. But each individual is I'm not sure if irrepeatable is a word, if I'm making it up here. The general idea. Sure. That's even better. I'm going to act like I said that. But each individual is unique. And that is the other half of what makes each life sacred. And from my perspective, having the symptoms of human dignity later on, like equality, which is a great thing, it all stems from the original idea that everyone is created with this human dignity. And at that moment, you have a life there. The idea that of multiple surgeries, and there are many people that can probably talk about that a lot better than I'm about to. The concept of natural death as opposed to not providing any type of
Intervention.
assistance.
Yeah.
Intervention. And here's another example. Let's say the government ends tomorrow. How many adults do you think are going to live a month? Okay. How many of them are viable? Not many. Okay. But no, I think this is an example of where we have a disagreement as to what is life. And I'm actually glad you didn't bring up the whole idea. The one thing that irritates me to no end is people say, what about, rape and incest? I understand it. What about all the people who were born and feel like shit because people basically indicate that they don't deserve to live? They should have been aborted. I think that number is either 42 or 48% of people who products of rape are actually born, put up for adoption, or kept. And I don't think that we should be treating them as if they are any less equal to somebody who was born absolutely perfect, such as yourself, somebody who may be born with some issues like me, or if they have an extra chromosome. I think that a society where we put a focus on life, and I get the arguments that say, what about the mother? I think we got to do more to support her in these situations. I don't think they should ever be backed into a situation. I think that there are probably other solutions to at least help make the burden better, so people aren't pushed. They feel like that's the decision they have to make. I'd love to see more resources go to that in general, because life's important, and if we don't put it paramount, everything else flows from that, in my perspective.